Welcome to Native Talk Arizona, Native Health's Native American Cultural Affairs program, presented by Native Health and KRDP 90.7 FM. I'm Susan Levy. Jacob Moore is Vice President and Special Advisor on American Indian Affairs at Arizona State University, and he's here to discuss the Indigenous programs at ASU. Jacob, welcome to Native Talk Arizona.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And I love ASU. I'm a former Sun Devil.
Go Devils.
Yes, Go Devils. They're going to be good this year?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, basketball or football?
Football, definitely.
Okay.
We'll see about basketball. So.
Okay. All right. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. I was doing some research, and you've done some amazing things.
Okay. Well, first of all, Skuktash, Anyapchugik Jacob Moore, Anyapchugik Akimidatam, Tanatam Lakuta Dakuta. My name is Jacob Moore. I'm a citizen of the Tanatam Nation in southern Arizona, although my mother is from Montana and her mother's from Cheyenne River in South Dakota. So that is my Lakota Dakota side. I grew up in southern Arizona. My grandmother was from Pozo Verde, which is a village on the other side of the border in Mexico, which is also part of the Tanatam territory. And my grandfather is from Gila River. So I'm all mixed up. I've got four tribes, but enrolled in the nation. My wife is from Salt River, Pima, Maricopa, so I live in the Salt River Indian community, and I think that's probably, I'll start there, and then we'll see where we go from here. So.
I know you've done a lot, and when I was reading about you, and you've had such an amazing career, I know you began as an intern at ASU, so, right?
As far as my ASU work, yes, but career-wise, I grew up in southern Arizona down in my dad's reservation down in Sells, and we moved to Tempe when I was in high school. My father got his degree from ASU in education with a minor in Indian Ed. He started going to the program at, first Phoenix College and then the program at Center for Indian Ed at ASU in about 64. I was actually probably 4 or 5 years old at the time, so I've been around the campus for a little while. My mother got her degree at ASU in social work in the 80s. I got my degree at ASU in the 90s in business. I got an undergrad in finance, came back later and did an executive MBA. But more to your question is that I did a year of college coming out of high school, didn't really care for it, and I took an entry-level job in downtown Phoenix at a bank back when there was state banking. And after, like I said, a year of college, I started at entry level in the sub-basement as a bookkeeper, and then moved my way up to the teller line. I did foreign exchange. I ran a drive-in branch back when we used to have drive-in. Still do, but not the same as it was back 40 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
During that time, that was really when interstate banking came in, which really disrupted the whole business of banking. I had switched over to another state bank called United Bank. That was bought by Charter Bank for a short period of time when other banks started moving into Arizona, and then it was bought by Citibank. And then Citibank, after a couple of years, became Norwest Bank, and then Norwest Bank became Wells Fargo Bank, which it is today. So in that maybe 14, 15-year career, I went through 3 mergers and acquisitions and worked my way up to an operations officer, which it was as far as I could go without a degree. I was actually taking, banking classes in the evening, but really I didn't like night school. So, my story, I guess, is that I wasn't really doing any work specifically with tribes. I was, basically here in the greater Phoenix area. And again, doing volunteer work over that entire time with first on the board as Phoenix Indian Center, and then what was a predecessor of Native Health, which was Indian Community Health Service. I was on that board for a number of years, actually probably when the first grant that really started Native Health was on the original board.
I did not know that.
Back in, probably about 79 or 80. Irma Mundy was the director back then.
Okay, I remember hearing Irma's name.
So, in fact, Walter Merle and I were on the board together at one time. So I was really, in the greater Phoenix area and really doing volunteer work in the urban Indian community and, working in banking. And so my father, after we moved back up here, he was a counselor at Mesa Community College to Native students, and then started teaching an English class at ASU for Native students before there was American Indian Studies, and then went to the Department of Education at the state in bilingual education when we used to have bilingual education before it was outlawed, and then transferred to the Office of Indian Education at ADE at the state. So he was the director of Indian education, and all that time was when I was, doing my banking. And he always had this interest from the time that he left Cells, when we moved away, to go back and go back and run for office. And so he did that. He got elected as chairman in like the 83, I think, and at that time they were called the Papago tribe. And so under his administration, they took back their traditional name, they revised their constitution, they changed their name to the Thanatam Nation. So he was doing this really interesting work, and always encouraging me to go back to school. And I told him, I got bills to pay, and it's always hard to kind of get out of that, being able to work and go back to school, especially when you're getting older. And you just get intimidated by the idea of going back to school when the students in college are younger, And so, I promised that, one day I'd go back. And so he said, well, if you're going to stay in banking, learn what you can, because tribes might need that kind of experience someday. That was before gaming, came into the state, or, the tribes were involved in the casino business. And so he lost his election for a second term, came back up here, did some work for Intertribal Council of Arizona. We started to develop this, relationship, not just father-son, but more kind of colleagues, as my work, was starting to develop as I was in my early 30s, and he still was a mentor. He ran again in either 89 or 90 and got reelected as chairman, and unfortunately was diagnosed with colon cancer and passed away in 93. We were just going through another merger and acquisition. They were downsizing, the operation, and folks were asking me on the tribe side is, what are you going to do with my father's passing? And so get emotional about it, but it was, I made a promise, to go back to school. So at 34, 35, I decided to make that switch. I decided that I would be poor, for a while, and just go back full time and get in and get out and go work for tribes. So I went to Mesa Community College. I took my 101s, 102s, my entry level. I was encouraged that I could test out, given my background and my experience. And I said, no. So one day I went a master's. And so for me to get there, I would have to get through undergrad, but, do well academically. So I needed that foundation of reading, writing, math. And I enjoyed Mesa Community College. I stayed there for 3 years and had 90 credit hours. You only need 68 to transfer. So it's like...
You really liked it.
And, so it's like, well, I guess I should, transfer to Arizona State. and did well academically, and then managed to get a partial scholarship into their College of Business and completed my degree. And I was looking for entry-level positions in economic development, given my banking background and a degree in finance. So I went out to Salt River, and they offered me an internship there. And then when I graduated, they offered me a full-time position in economic development. And then I worked in their I ended up in their administration, worked for the president, vice president, and council. And so back to your question, is an intern at ASU is so when the president I was working for, Ivan Mako, left office, he parlayed his 9 years of experience into a consulting business and talked me into joining him. And so that's when I went back and did my MBA. And he had a contract with ASU that was his gig. It wasn't my work. We were doing work together or doing work separately. There were three of us, three partners. And so one day he called me up and he said, do you want to help me with this project that I have at ASU? I was on campus because I was, studying for homework or whatever. And so I said, sure. And then he said, if you want to help me with this project. And he said, I think they have some money to pay you. So we met with that department, which was public affairs. And public affairs said, well, you're a student, So we can offer you a part-time position as an intern versus a contract, and then you would then be eligible for a tuition discount on your university tuition, not my college tuition. The College of Business tuition for that program was like $32,000 a year, so it was a $64,000 program, and so that I still had to pay, but I got a little bit of a discount, and then ended up staying in that intern position. Even after I graduated, I was still doing some work within that role, and so when I know this is a long story, so I'll try not to.
No, it's good.
I'll wrap this up.
And I was obviously wrong on your intern thing, so my research wasn't very good.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so
I didn't use AI.
Part of it, was because I know that when I was asked to, so the special advisor, which was Peter Zanza out at ASU for a number of years, when he left or retired, Diane Hamitua, who was a former U.S. attorney, came in for a couple of years, and then she was nominated and appointed as a federal district court judge. We were doing some consulting work with public affairs, but she invited me to consider coming in as the interim special advisor until they found somebody. And I thought I'm fine with the consulting side, but if it's interim, that's okay. I mean, I've been doing some work there for 7 years, so I had some sense of what that would be like. So I came in as interim, and then working with the senior vice president, to President Crow, his chief of staff, we looked at how the work was happening, how the growth was happening, increase in enrollment, increasing in programming, and we figured out that that was probably more than one person, to fill that role as special advisor, and we split that into 2 jobs. So we created an assistant vice president of tribal relations, and then I was appointed to that position in government affairs because that was my work, was working externally with tribes, which is what we were doing on the consulting side already, but in this case with Arizona State. And then Dr. Brian Brayboy, researcher, faculty, high profile, director of Center for Indian Ed, was appointed as the special advisor. And so he was in that role for about 8 years and left in 2023 to be a dean at Northwestern. I think the College of Education and Social Change. And so his recommendation to the leadership at ASU is move me up and backfill the government affairs. And I didn't know whether that would happen, but a couple of weeks later, I got the offer, and so I accepted it. And then, of course, the university made a big deal out of it, and they had a reporter assigned to, interview me, create a profile. And so I think that's kind of where that story came from, because he couldn't get his head around this idea that how did I go from being an intern at the university to an assistant vice president? So long way to get to that answer. So
you've done so many amazing things. So it sounds like your father really mentored you and is the one that probably instilled like public service and working with the tribes and giving back, right? That's sort of what
Yeah, I mean, I think both my parents did, and that my mother was in social work as well. Yeah, so between a social worker and educator. But it's interesting because if we look at, so I think that community engagement was, kind of one that when I saw them do, but also I think encouraged to do. But the other, I think, in terms of education-wise, is if you look at the trends, more anecdotally, is that in the 50s and 60s, Native students, the few that were going to college, were encouraged to get into education. And then I think the trends into the 70s and 80s was social work, along with law, and so we had a lot of attorneys that came out during that era, still do, but seem to be venturing more into those fields. And so then I think, again, once gaming came in as part of it, but also as tribes were getting more savvy on the business side, is more moving into business. And so in some ways, I think within my own family, kind of following that trend from an educator to a social worker to now someone with a degree in business. So.
What a story. Okay, so when I go back to ASU, it's like ASU's grown tremendously, even since I was there a long time ago. But it seems like they do such a great job with with the Native students, the programs that they've got and that they're developing. Maybe it's just my perception, but it seems like it's a lot more than other universities.
Yes, and I would agree. I mean, I think if we look at institutions across the country in terms of higher ed, I think, arguably we have the highest number of American Indian students or Indigenous or Native students probably in the country. I know there's a couple institutions, smaller institutions that I would say UNM, in Gallup, probably has, 3,000, 3,500 students. They're so close to Navajo Nation and Zuni and, some of that area that predominantly are probably Navajo. But in terms of large institutions, large universities, we have more Native students at ASU either identify solely as Native or inclusive, which we refer to in terms of two or more races on how they self-identify. We have more than the two California systems combined. So.
Wow. I did not know that. But yeah. I think the programs that you all have developed, you or whoever is responsible, have just done a tremendous job. I look at all the different programs and talk to a lot of the students, and they absolutely love it. And I think the outreach things that you've done in the community, is it Visiting the Nations? Is that the one in August? I know you've got
TNT, the Tribal Nations Tour.
Yeah, the Tribal Nations Tour, and then you've got like Inspire.
Summer Bridge program. Right?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not very good with all the names.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
But just all the things that you do are so amazing, and the programs for students and getting them welcomed and used to going to school and the university and university life and connecting them and the job fairs and the mixers.
Yeah, I don't think that I would be at ASU. I went back to school with this idea that I was going to work for tribes. So my heart is with the tribes, and I got the opportunity to do that. In some ways, I still do that. In other ways, so I wasn't expecting to be at a university. But again, whether it's personal history or ASU in general, is that we've described this as a 60-year overnight success. Because when we go back to 1959. Was when the Center for Indian Ed was created. That was the first program of its kind that I'm aware of, but also just how, and in fact, both not just my father, but Peterson Zaw, Jefferson Begay, there was, who else? There was another former chairman from Hopi, Vernon Masayesfa. They were all students at ASU at that time, but there was probably less than 10 of them. And so to see where we're now, a little bit over 4,000 students at ASU, both undergrad, graduate, both in-person, online. In fact, online is growing very fast. I would say that we're like 51% online, for our Native students, and the other half are in person. But, back to, where did this come from was that, like I said, I wouldn't be there if it wasn't, for President Crow and the university's charter. I don't have the entire charter memorized, but, the first part, speaks to that we measure our success at ASU not by whom we exclude, but whom we include and how they succeed. And then the last part of the charter says that we take fundamental responsibility for the social, cultural, and economic well-being of the communities that we serve. And so it's more than a statement. I think that we are encouraged to live that, every day. And it's chaotic, but in a good way. I think that, there's constantly something, new happening at ASU. It's so broad, in terms of we're now going into medical school, with an engineering emphasis. And so Global Futures Laboratory, very much about environmental and climate change and our engineering programs. But so I think part of it is that, I often tell this story whenever I'm kind of making public appearances, so to speak, but I'm somewhat of a kid in a candy store because my interest is in tribal nations and communities and Native students and education as the great leveler. there's equity in terms of how our communities can grow and be healthy that education has a great influence on. And so, I just am blessed to work with individual colleges and tribes and figure out, is there a program here that would benefit, San Carlos Apache tribe or Hopi tribe or different tribes within the state and outside of the state as well.
So in your position as the special advisor on American Indian Affairs, do you have input, or do you go to President Crow or however the structure is of the university and say, hey, I have this idea, or for the medical school, like, I think we should do this. Mm-hmm. What do you have those opportunities to do that? Or
yes, absolutely. In fact, it's encouraged. We are encouraged to create opportunities, and we have the freedom to do that, which I think is where the chaos comes from, because the fact of the matter is that they don't always go well. But we have the freedom to take that risk, and if it doesn't work, then fix it or figure out how we do it differently. It's also very interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, which is unique. It's this model that President Crow has touted as the new American university. So we're not insular. We're not. Our faculty and Department of English, are not just in the Department of English. They're encouraged to work with the other social sciences. Students can tailor a degree, that may be in economics, but if they want to add on some literature, they can do that as well. And I think part of that philosophy is that that's how life is. It's not just like in one discipline,
Right.
And so in some ways I think our students are coming out better suited, to deal with the real world, because they're being encouraged to, kind of cross, pollinate, so to speak. And like I said, it becomes a little bit tense sometimes, because you may have a faculty member who is expecting that this is their work, but then they also find others across the institution that are maybe doing something similar. And so they have to have that ability to be able to reach across and say, let's figure out how we can make this work. The parts are, how is that greater than the whole, or the whole is greater than the parts, I guess, and that's where the magic is. And so I don't know how I, not having worked for universities before, I'm not sure how I would function at another university, only because maybe in some ways in tribal communities, sometimes I think we grow up, in chaos, and so I'm very comfortable there.
So what do you see, so I know you said the medical school is coming. That's coming in, what, a year, 2 years?
I believe we already have a cohort that just started this semester.
Wow.
So, yeah, okay. That may be a little bit more tailored, to a particular program, but I would say that the medical schooling itself is probably no more than 2 years out. Obviously, they got to raise a ton of money and build a building, but certainly we've already started to a certain degree, in part because College of Health Solutions has had this relationship with Mayo up to this point. And so technically there were ways that, you could probably move toward a medical degree with our affiliation with Mayo. But as far as a teaching hospital, we now established a partnership with Honor Health, so they will be our teaching hospital.
We'll continue our interview with Jacob Moore after this short break. Support for KRDP 90.7 FM comes in part from Native Health, with 2 locations in Phoenix, 4041 North Central Avenue, Building C, near the corner of Central Avenue and Indian School Road, and at 8800 North 22nd Avenue. Native Health is also located in Mesa at 777 West Southern Avenue, near the corner of Southern Avenue and Extension Road. Native Health provides primary medical, dental, behavioral health, WIC, and wellness services for the urban Native American community. For more information, call 602-279-5262 or visit our webpage at nativehealthphoenix.org.
So are you working on like trying to grow the workforce, so the indigenous workforce into healthcare? Is that one of your initiatives? Or I know I kind of put you on the spot. That wasn't one of the questions.
No, exactly. Well, I mean, in some ways, like I said, these aren't just kind of altruistic. That's part of it, but the other is the realities of what the world has handed us. Not just as individuals, but families and communities. And so certainly the pandemic was very destructive and very disruptive, I guess, to our tribal communities. But it also exposed a lot of the lack of infrastructure. Whether it was water or food systems or healthcare delivery or education or broadband technology. And so in some ways that I think created some opportunities to recognize where an institution like ASU or any of the other universities, NAU or U of A, have the expertise and the resources to help address those types of issues. And so in some ways in my prior role in Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community as their intergov, my job was to report to the president, vice president, and council, and keep them, updated on any, border skirmishes with our surrounding jurisdictions, whether it was Mesa or Scottsdale or Fountain Hills, but also to work with the MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments, or all of the state agencies or the federal agencies that tribes interact with, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce. It's pretty amazing when you think about the responsibilities that tribes have as sovereigns, that are different than a city town council that just has like one layer, but they have, a city council member has the benefit of homeowners association that might be taking care of somebody's trash, or the county that has some responsibility, or the state. Tribes don't have that. They have to handle all of it and run businesses on top of that. And so there was a time, as really to represent Salt River, or at least advise the leadership in terms of what's the issue and how should we consider approaching it, or what does our education director think, or what does our health and human services believe that we should be approaching these challenges or opportunities. And so having been on that side of sat across the table, from universities and others that come knocking on the tribe's door to say, we want to do business with you. And I think from that experience, what I've learned to understand is that there are probably like 5 major areas that tribes are having to deal with at any given moment. The president or the general community manager or whoever is spending an hour, of their time on the court, and then the next hour on education, and then the meeting after that could be on environmental or jurisdictional issues. And so those areas that, kind of off the top of my head is economic development, health and human services, governance. Governance can include the courts, the detention facilities, other programs. What else? Environmental and natural resources, and I think there's one more. But those are so like there's like these 5 buckets, and so from the university side, I try and flip the script with the university, who historically, from a research side, has been extractive. They got a grant. They have a researcher who has a solution. Now they got to find a community that has the problem that they're trying to solve. And so, my advice to that researcher is, before you even think that you know the solution to the problem, you need to go learn the community and understand what the real issue is, because it may not be what you're thinking. And more importantly, they're not going to trust you, first of all. So you're going to have to spend some time building up some level of trust that you're not there just to be extractive for either that grant or that publication, to advance your own career. But is there an opportunity for, a win-win situation where you're leaving something behind, that there's reciprocity in what we do in terms of research, that the university isn't just thinking about is how do we advance the university, but how's the university advance the community?
And I know in talking about research, I know that you also have the the research conference coming up, right?
Doing research in Indigenous communities?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I was looking for more information on that and found a little bit, but not a lot about it.
I think it's in October.
Yeah, October, but I was looking for, The registration's not out yet because I know that fills really fast when you talk about that.
Right.
So let me backtrack a little bit. What programs does ASU have for Indigenous students? I know that you've got ASU American Indian Student Support Services. And now I'm drawing a blank now that I say
Labriola.
that. Labriola, which is at Hayden Library in Tempe only, right?
Well, they also are in the West Valley campus too.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah, they have more archives on that side. So.
Okay. And what other, I know there's a ton of other programs. American Indian Studies. I'm trying to think what else. Now I can't think of any of it. Well, now I can't think of any of them.
So I'll try not to. This will take a little bit of time, but I'll make it quick. So it depends on whether we're talking about academic programming or we're talking about student support services. I would, in terms of academically, they're not just we certainly have American Indian Studies. In fact, we're really re-energizing our American Indian Studies program, and we still have Center for Indian Education. We have construction in Indian Country, which is clearly in engineering. Yeah, they got their conference coming up. They have a good conference. They have a good golf tournament to raise scholarship money for Native students interested in engineering. So if and then the Indian Legal Program, the law school, is a longstanding, well-respected law program. Those in some ways were the four kind of primary that maybe we can say have been around, from, again, 1959. Some started in the 80s and some in the 90s. And so those are maybe our more traditional programs, but clearly we've got others like Indigenous Design Collaborative. In architecture, we have two Native women architects, Wanda de la Costa from Canada and Tammy Eaglebowl, the first Lakota, the first Native person in the U.S. to get her architect license. And so they're running a program called Indigenous Design Collaborative. We have Crystal Sosi, a highly sought after geneticist, but also Dr. Sosi in doing genetics research, but also with an eye on data sovereignty. We have a gentleman, Gary Moore, who is in nanotechnology. We have Melissa Nelson, who is all about traditional food systems and native science, indigenous science. That's in Global Futures Laboratory, who again is really working with a number of tribes in the kind of northern California coastal areas and other places around indigenous food systems and native science. And so that's just a start, because I could probably go on. And of course, I'm going to leave some out, so I don't want to, I don't want to offend them by not including them. But I would say yes, we social work. Can't forget social work.
Oh yeah.
Office of American Indian Projects. We've got Chris Sharp. Yeah.
It seems to me, looking at it, that you have more programs than any other university for Indigenous students. Is that correct?
I don't. I've tried not to compare in terms of who has what, in part because it's all good. I mean, it
is all good and everybody's good.
Yeah,
but
especially like, say, with our colleagues to the south, we have this football rivalry. But my comment is, house divided, but education united. And we do meet with our colleagues at NAU and U of A and compare notes, but. On the other ones that are not like for a bachelor's degree or a master's degree is like American Indian Policy Institute or Thunderbird Global School of Management has this Dreamcatcher program.
Oh yeah,
that's
very
a
successful.
1 week entrepreneurship for Native women. I think from predominantly five tribes, in terms of the funding source, which is Freeport McMoran, but. It really took off. I mean, that happened like 2 or 3 years into when I started at the university, and we were like begging people to sign up because we had 30 slots available, and I think we had like 14, and now we have far more Native women that apply than we can even get into a 30 person cohort. So we're running 2 or 3 programs a year, And then again, American Indian Policy Institute is doing this Indigenous Leadership Academy, which is like a Valley Leadership type program. It's a 10-week program. It's online, so we're getting, folks from all across the country that are participating. And they too have probably by now have had at least 180 graduates. And we're starting to venture into Indigenous leadership for healthcare, Indigenous Leadership Academy for energy, and Indigenous Leadership Academy for education.
So are you the one that sits around and thinks of, not that you're sitting around, but are you the one that sits at the table or whatever you're doing, thinking up these programs? Is it primarily you that's the driver and you say, hey, you know what, we should do this, like Indigenous Leadership Academy for healthcare? So I'm assuming this is all coming from you?
Not just me. I mean, certainly there's a lot of other people. I would say that, my job, is to help, facilitate introductions and then just get out of the way, and let people do good work. In some ways I have the benefit of being in the catbird seat, being in the president's office. And so President Crow would describe those of us that work directly for him as your concierge and your air traffic controllers. And so we also can recognize when somebody over here in this college has a good idea, but coincidentally there's somebody else over here already working in that space. So can we make that introduction to say, rather than duplicate this effort, is there a way that maybe we can merge some of this work or not? So on the faculty side, those that identify as faculty, not staff, but faculty, as Native only, we have, at least the last year, we have 44. But those that identify as, having some Native and, maybe something else, we have about 91. And then that doesn't include our allies. We have a lot of non-Native. Dr. Tyler Peterson is in linguistics, and he's sought after by tribes in terms of language recovery. So he has more work than he can handle in terms of helping tribes revitalize their native languages. So I really appreciate the honor and the opportunity to make some of these introductions, but sometimes I hear about something that was created that I didn't even know was happening. It's like, oh, we're doing that? Oh, that's great. So
all right, so education obviously is the most important thing for everybody. What tips do you have for, I'm assuming when you're talking to your children about education, you want to start early on and encourage them homework and good study habits and pursue education if that's the path that they want to take.
Right.
What tips would you have for, let's say, I don't know, 8th grade or high school thinking about college? Is that a time that they should be thinking about it? I know times have changed, and now there's a lot of online and everything else. Is that a good time to start saying, hey, let's talk about college. Let's think about what your career path might be, what you like. What advice do you have?
I would maybe approach the question from two different ways of answering it. The first would be personal, and the second would be, what we're seeing, academically or in terms of research. So the first is that, yes, I would say those earlier grades are better. The sooner that we can inspire, 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders to think about college and start thinking about what is it that they want to be, when they grow up. Because unfortunately, whether they're in an urban community or tribal community, is that life is rough. And sometimes once they start hitting those high school, grade levels, is that, the life hasn't been so great to them. And so they lose some of that. I guess that they're a bit jaded in terms of what the options are available to them. And so I think we certainly there are juniors and seniors that will be inspired, but by then they've probably already made up their mind whether they think they're capable or not. They're all capable, but by then, they have had some kind of traumatic experience that, they no longer see, the hope or the light at the end of the tunnel. So the more that we can encourage them at those earlier ages, that's when they still, believe that they can be an astronaut or the president, or the tribal chairman, and so it's good to really encourage at those earlier ages. And then the second, I think, is, for me, I learned this later in life because I was not a good student. We moved to Phoenix, to Tempe, and I grew up around all Native kids, and from kindergarten to my freshman year were all the same kids that I grew up with, and very few, handful of Native students. And so when we moved here, it was just a complete flip where there was maybe 10 Native students and, 400, 500 non-Native students. And that was quite the culture shock. And I never really recovered from that. And even though my dad was an educator, it's like, he was out of education, working at work. But for me, it was like, I was struggling. And so I didn't have a good experience. And so and it hurts, you don't show it, but when you get bad grades, you don't say anything or you blow it off, and it's not that important to you, but, or at least you don't think at that age. And so when I came back, in my 30s, it's like, okay, I'm more mature, I'm older, I've, been through some things and I can do this. Is that, for example, I took, and I would encourage anyone to take college study skills course, college survival skills. And they teach you how to read or how to, reading meaning there's a, process called SQ3R. I forget what that stands for, study review, and then I forget what or study quiz review. I forget what all the R's are, but you don't just read from, the page 1 to page 30. You review, you scan it, then you go to the back and you read the questions that you're going to have to answer after you finish the chapter. You read it before you read the chapter, because then your brain is already going to start looking for those answers when you read. And then you read the subtitles, of all the sections. So you kind of know where it's going, and then you read it. And you don't necessarily even have to read every word, but, you'll pick it up a lot faster because you kind of know where you're going, and so that's one example. But when I came back, like I said, I didn't have good grades before that. And I really, focused on getting good grades. The second time around, I was used to working 8 to 5 and said, I'm going to treat this as an 8 to 5 job. I was taking care of my mother who had severe rheumatoid arthritis. And so for me, it was important to be home when I wasn't in class. And so, it would come home at the end of the day like I was during work. So I said, I'm going to stay on campus. I'm going to get there at 8, go to class, go study, go to my next class, go study, then go home. Where when we're younger, we're like, okay, we're going to take that class and I'm going to go home, and then you end up on the couch and then you sleep and then you forget, that you got homework to do. So I stuck to that schedule, and then that first semester I started getting A's, and that was something unique to me. And then this light bulb went off, like at 34, 35, is that if you study, you get good grades. That I didn't know that. So it's not that our Native kids are not smart, it's that they just don't know how to study. And the more that they can understand study skills, I think, the more likely that you can be successful at school. So I don't want to go too long, but the second part of that in terms of academically is that some of the research that's been done, including Dr. Brayboy, is there's 4 things, and we've added a 5th to that, is preparation. It's not just reading, but can you read a biology book or can you read a calculus book? So there's certain, there's technical reading. There's technical writing. It's not just writing essays. Do you understand research? So preparation, when you get there, is really important. And then the next one would be financial aid. Do you have the money? Have you started looking for scholarships? Do you know how much? Do your parents understand, the submitting of FAFSA, that you may need their, you'll need their tax returns in order to get started. And once you do that, then you can apply for other scholarship money. So financial aid is another one, the second one. And then what they call cultural congruity, or really culture shock, is can they, much like my experience, which, they didn't do well, in the high school, is you're coming from a different environment. If you've grown up in a rural tribal community where you're very close to your culture and traditions, for example, and then you come to a university like ASU, can you get past fitting in? You're going to be lonely. Can you overcome that? Which leads to the next one, is your social integration. Can you find community? Can you join a student organization? Can you take on a leadership role? And then the other one would be mentors. Do you have a mentor? Do you should, if not, go find one or go look for mentors. And so that's the kind of the 4. But the one that we added to that was health and wellness, not just their physical health, but their well-being, their spiritual well-being. Can we accommodate, the fact that, were having sweats at home and now they're in a university setting. So can we help support them in terms of their own cultural understandings, but more importantly, especially coming out of the pandemic, is do they have enough food to eat? Are they okay? I mentioned all of these staff and folks that we have during the pandemic. We used to do a call every week, a Zoom meeting, is for those that are closest to our students, is how are they doing? How is their dorm situation, or what's happening? And so now that we're no longer in the pandemic, I think we scale that back to like every 3 weeks, every third week, we meet, but specifically not just our program folks that are most directly connected to students, but folks from student services, from financial aid, from admissions office, from health services, from behavioral health services, just to check in and make sure everybody's okay.
So Jacob, how has your cultural identity shaped who you are today, and how's it impacted your career journey? Because you've done so many amazing things, and people really do talk about you with such awe and honor and respect.
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. But I think the fact that I'm not from one tribe has had a kind of interesting effect, because certainly I continue to support the Thanatham Nation and other work that I do. Have a good working relationship with both our legislative council and our elected leadership, as much as I do with other tribes as well. But really the heart of it is that I grew up down here. My mother, again, being from Montana, I haven't spent as much time on that side, and up north, but down here, I take great pride in that I had a great aunt, Anna Moore Shaw, who graduated from Carl Hayden, like somewhere around 1912 or 1915. She actually was one of the first inductees into the Arizona Women's Hall of Fame. She wrote a couple books, one called Pima Past, about her generation and her parents' generation when they were Christianized, and even before that, Pima Legends, a book on Pima Legends. And then her nephew, my grandfather's brother, was from Gila River, but ended up in Chicago or in Blue Island and learned to play instruments. And long story short is, became a jazz musician that played with Louis Armstrong, and really at that highest level in terms of, playing with people like Miles Davis and a lot from that era. And then my father, going on to become, chairman for his tribe, is that when people ask me, how did you become a vice president? Because that seems to be something that is not easy to attain. The answer is that I'm the slacker in my family. But because they were in a different generation when it was much more difficult than what I can do now. But really, I think the short answer to that is that it was when I found my focus. When I was in banking, it was fun. It was good work, but it was a job. And so when my father passed, it forced me to say, well, what is it that you want to do? And became laser focused on what am I going to do when I finish school, and what am I going to do with it. That it really opened up the doors and gave me that, both the freedom and the confidence that I could do what I'm doing now.
And you're passionate, and you care about it, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, you're amazing. All right, so we're pretty much out of time. So since I have to wrap it up, how can our listeners find more information about ASU's Indigenous programs? Your work, I don't know if they're allowed to contact you or not, but I guess the first question is, how would they find out about programs at ASU?
Sure. ASU.edu is going to be the easiest way. Just go to ASU.edu. It's got a good search engine. The first I would suggest is American Indian Student Support Services, or what we call AISSS. If you're interested in attending ASU, you can go to American Indian Student Support Services. You can make an appointment with a counselor. A lot of their work is more geared toward, those that are already within ASU, but certainly they can direct you from there. We've got two great recruiters, one up in northern Arizona, Amber, and then Nadeline, that are in admissions that solely are recruiting Native students. And so, ask AISSS for contact information for Madeline or Amber, and they can certainly help them find their path.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you here today. It's always wonderful to see you and hear what you've been up to, and thank you for making a difference.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for asking me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Native Talk Arizona, presented by Native Health and 90.7 FM KRDP. Our executive producer is Susan Levy. Sound engineer is Javier Quiroga. We hope you will tune in again next week. If you have any questions, please reach us at nativetalkaz@listen2krdp.com.